Well, yeah, in school, I turned everything into scripts. I turned everything into theater. I would write a pilot for Star Trek, or I would create a monologue that I had to do. I used theater as a way to kind of help me.
And I think it's important for the person who's partnering, in whatever way that looks like, whether it's parent, child, siblings, friends, whatever
coworker.
It is. Yeah, your husband or wife or, spouse. I think it's just that process of like giving each other space and also really tuning and attending and not reading into what is being said or not said or done or not done as well. Hello, Megan.
Hello, Michelle.
Welcome to Sisters. There were never such devoted sisters. Hello. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Always happy to be with you, too.
Looking at your new awesome glasses.
Thank you, Kate Spade.
Oh, what? I love them. They frame you beautifully.
Thank you.
So nice. I think we've had the same glasses for the past, 10 years, so it might be time.
It might be time.
Might be time to try something new.
It's only if you feel like you want to try something new.
That's true. I think it's mostly just that they're scratched now and sad, so I probably just need new ones.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You came late to the game when it comes to glasses because you were a bit older when you got them.
Yeah.
So you start to learn, scratches just really start to piss you off. Like these new ones,
you off.
Michelle, these new ones have like some weird engraving on them, and I can see it, and it's like it feels like it's blurry, and I'm like, why is there engraving on my glass? Like, I get it, probably most people would never notice it, but I do.
Yes, your hypersensitivity to that is like, now I see it, and now I can't unsee it, and now the entire podcast you're going to be like, I'm seeing it.
Well, yeah, probably that's true. But if people want to see the new glasses, they can go to our YouTube channel.
Yes,
and search Rosie's Brain, because that's where we're at. We're at Rosie's Brain. I can also put a link in the description of our podcast to it.
Oh, I love that. Obviously, what we do usually is I bring up some sort of a topic or a memory or something, right? Mm-hmm. And then we usually like dig into that brain of yours to figure out what's going on. And then if there's any strategies or anything like that you might have found or work, and we talk about that. And then we like to invite our community to give us some feedback and give us some of their ideas. So today I would love to talk to you about speech and debate.
Speech and debate, huh?
Yeah. So back in the day, we were nerds, both of us.
Yep.
And we were both on speech and debate different times, right?
Is that a nerdy thing?
Yes. Yeah, I'm just going to go with yes. Is it nerdier than band? I don't know. I mean, I think we could have some debate. But yes.
Michelle, when I was in college, I went to some college party, and this guy, his name was Attila.
Oh.
And he was 100% Hungarian. But Attila was talking. He's like, yeah, like in high school, those like band nerds and like the drama nerds and like the honors nerds. Oh, yeah. And like the speech and debate nerds. I look at him and I was like, band, honors, speech and debate, and drama. I must be the biggest nerd you've ever met. And he was totally trying to like, hook up with me. And he's like, oops.
I can be pretty and brilliant. Thank you very much. Oh, what? Okay, so the reason I want to ask this is, so when I was in speech, I didn't do debate. I don't think you did debate either. We did the speech side of things. But when I did speech, I did like oratory, extemporaneous, impromptu speaking.
Seriously?
What did you lean towards?
Oh, drama and comedy. Like all of anything where you had to perform by yourself or a duo. Like as long as there was a script in front of me, I was fine.
Okay, so scripts are my nightmare.
Really?
Because memorizing them is really, really hard for me. Like if somebody just gives me a topic and says go, fine, no problem. But I have such a hard time with memorizing scripts. So That was always, I always did the
Fascinating.
ones where you could hold the script in front of you while you were doing it. You didn't have to memorize it. So I wanted to know why you picked a script as opposed to like an oratory or a, something where you would just talk sort of extemporaneously off the top of your head.
Well, I don't like talking off the top of my head. I mean, I do. But I have found that others don't particularly follow or enjoy when I talk off the top of my head. Like,
Okay.
I've wanted to do, some sort of a YouTube thing or something for a long time because I have the training. But sitting and talking to myself just sounds like the absolute bane of my existence.
Right. Like some people can get on YouTube and just start talking.
Yeah. And they're amazing. And it's incredible. And I just sit there and I'm like, I don't know what to talk about next because like I literally am blurting inside of my head consistently all the time that I lose track of what I was talking about.
So the internal, so this is the topic for today, which is speaking in an organized way can sometimes be an issue for people with ADHD and executive functioning issues, right?
Is that true?
It is. It's one of like when I went on the Google and it was like, what are some of the things that, are symptoms, right? Speaking in an organized way or having trouble speaking in an organized way was one of them.
Wow.
So
you're blowing my mind right now, Michelle. No, it's true. Like I never considered that this was part of my ADHD. Like there are things that I know for a fact. I'm like, that's ADHD. But I never would have thought that that was one of them.
Interesting. So okay, so let's dig into this a little bit, right? So you're going to get ready to get up and do your YouTube, and you just said you're blurting internally while you're talking. So can you take us through what that might look like? Like what the internal monologue is happening while you're trying to talk, for example. Sometimes you were getting up and you were like you like to like rant about something, right? Like you want to be incensed about something. So what's while you're trying to be incensed?
I could try and see what happens.
Okay, let's do it.
We don't have to keep this in here, but we can just try it.
Okay.
So my latest thing that I've been incensed about is that the Barbie movie, Ken and Barbie, and they're both spectacularly beautiful people, but why is it that Barbie has to be in her 30s, but Ken doesn't have to be? Like Ken, I mean, this is not about him as a person or acting or any of that, but just the sheer looks of it all, that he can have wrinkles, right? He has like very defined wrinkles because he's an older gentleman now. But Margot Robbie's character can't be wrinkled because she's Barbie. And so that kind of made me like a little crazy. So I'm like, wait, so Ken, when you look at him like as the doll, he doesn't have any wrinkles, but why is Ryan Gosling the ideal Ken if he's older, but then Margot is younger? It just blew my mind and I don't understand it. And that's where I would stop because I don't know what else to say and what's the next prompt.
Okay. And so what's happening in your brain at this moment? So now you're like, I know I want to go on to another thing, right? But what's your brain saying to you or not saying to you? What's it feel like internally right then?
Well, while I was talking all about that, I was visualizing the movie and I could see all the pictures in my head. And then all of a sudden, it's like all of the pictures just sort of tunneled out and they just sort of went off into the distance. And then it was just like a black hole, an abyss of like, what's next?
So when you're not seeing something sort of on the horizon, then you don't know what the next thing is?
Correct.
Like you have to visually see it?
I think, when I'm talking about it, like talking about even just the Barbie thing, right? I can rant, but like if you wanted me to put that rant into a succinct thesis, point conclusion, I don't even know. It would take a lot of energy for me to figure that out. I'd have to write it out and then I could talk about it.
You need to make a script.
Right. Like the ending clips of our podcast, I have to script it out. Otherwise I will not know what to say. and then I trip over myself. Like if anybody listens, I mean, you can hear that I kind of don't talk the same way that you do, right? Where you sort of naturally flow, and maybe every once in a while you might add a second word, like repeat a word, or you might maybe have like a quick break in your thoughts and like there's a quick silence. But for me, I struggle just to remember the words half the time. But I also struggle, a couple things happen. Right now I'm having like 4 different points in my head that I want to say, and I can't say them all at the same time because I have to give weight and it's hard to find the word. Like I'm trying to grab the word. I have to give importance to one of the points, right? But then the other thing that happens is like I will start saying one point and I've already finished it off in my head. And then I'm on to the next one, but I haven't finished the point to you. So
you're going a little quicker in your brain than your mouth is going.
Yes. And I've had to go through when I'm editing us, like I've had to go through and cut out those parts because I'll literally be talking about something, right? So I'm talking about Daisy, Daisy, she's just, and she's there and it's so cute and she's round and she's like kind of a little chubby, and we went to the beach yesterday. And then I've forgotten what I'm trying to say.
Got it. Yeah, so you completely lose the train of thought. Yeah. And I'm learning more about this, but part of what seems to be they're finding is that short-term memory is connected to ADHD. And so part of that retrieval process of like putting something into your short-term memory and keeping it there is actually harder for people with ADHD. So when you're doing something that requires you to keep multiple things in short-term memory at once, it's like you've blown, what's it called in a computer? Like you've blown your RAM or something. Like it's whatever keeps it kind of running in a loop. Kind of waiting there for you to retrieve it. You don't have enough space
like
for
your
that.
cache, like you don't have enough cache, like RAM cache for it basically.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm still reading more about that. So I'm sure if there's someone else out there who has lots more knowledge about this, right? This isn't, the goal of our podcast, but I think that's interesting is that short-term memory might be part of it.
Yeah, well, when I was diagnosed, this was back in like 99, so it was a long time ago. I was diagnosed with ADHD and short-term memory loss. So they were 2 separate things back then, at least. So I wonder if they're starting to recognize that, because I thought it was separate from the ADHD.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it is just something that's like, and I think they're learning a lot more about it now too. And that's been interesting. There's been some articles in the papers recently, like New York Times had an article about adults with ADHD and how you couldn't even have ADHD as an adult. And now they're realizing that that's definitely not true.
All of us who were like undeniable,
Yeah.
Well, the number of times they've tried to tell me, we don't know if it's ADHD. It could be trauma. It could be, and it's like, okay, well, then you go through it all and nope, still have ADHD, guys, still struggling.
Right. And I think that's the piece that's so hard is that it takes so long to get diagnosed sometimes and to have people believe you. And then to also, if you need the medication and it helps you. I know we talked about medication on one of the last podcasts and you hadn't had it. We've been doing all these podcasts up until this moment without you having your medication. And you now have it back the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
How is that different, or might that be different for you?
Oh, gosh, it's life-changing. Sounds ridiculous, but it is. It's life-changing. It doesn't solve the problems of ADHD, but it just makes it so much less difficult. It's like, if I keep imagining myself if I have to walk, and walking on, a straight path is a lot easier than walking through mud.
Right.
You still have to get to the same place, but if the mud's not there, then it's probably a lot easier, a lot less taxing to get to where you need to go.
And that's how it feels to you when you take medication, is that you're now not walking through mud?
Yeah, like I can actually focus long enough to write myself a list. Right? You and I, you were helping me, we talked before, we have a phrase we call the tomatoes, because online there's this tomato timer, and it's the Pomodoro timer where you do 25 minutes of intense work, 5 minutes of break. And what you had done for me is you said, okay, I'm going to give you like a 3 tomato challenge today. And here are the 3 things that I'm going to recommend that you get done during your break. But then you also mentioned like maybe do a 10-minute break, not a 5, but 10, just so I could get like my dishes done or like my laundry done or started at least. And after being on the medication now, I was like, that like little thing that Michelle told me to do was actually really helpful. I actually had that thought. So then I wrote down on my own, okay, what things do I want to accomplish during my breaks? And I was able to set my timer and do my 25 minutes of work and then do my little break. And then there were a couple of times that, I just, my ADHD brain was like,
no, we're doing something else.
But I think I got way more done that night than I would have. And I also didn't feel quite so stressed out the next day.
Interesting. I think this idea of doing things in sequential order, whether they're talking or completing, that all of these things relate back to some degree. And I wonder for you, do you find a difference being on the medication when you're trying to speak and say something, even just what we've been doing today? You going on this rant, I understand like that the visuals go out of your brain and that causes you to kind of get stopped. But does the medication help you to stay focused in a conversation more, or in saying something in sequential more, or is that really not what the medication does for you?
The thing I'm seeing or I'm feeling right now is that it doesn't help solve the ADHD. It purely helps the energy that it takes in order to combat the ADHD. I'm seeing all the same things that normally happen to me. It just is not as taxing. I've said it before where the fog lifted the very first time I took Adderall. And I was like, oh my God, like life could feel like this, like where it just doesn't feel difficult. And, last week we were driving, Brian and I, and on the way out of Monterey, we drove through the thickest fog I have ever seen. I've not, because we're from the desert, right? There's no fog.
Right.
And all of a sudden there's just this blanket of fog, and it freaked me out because I've never driven in it before. And so I had to slow way down and I had to be on high alert. And it took me, like, if I wanted to drive a mile on that road with fog, took me 3 or 4 times as long as it would have if there wasn't fog. So it's the same road, it's the same path, it's just
same car you're in with the same functionality.
Exactly. But it's just the fact that there's this barrier. I don't know what it is in the brain, but like there's this barrier that is slowing everything down.
So Adderall for you is lifting the fog, and then you just are still, though, in your like car that doesn't have great short-term memory.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. But it's like, but I don't also have fog on top of it.
Right. Exactly.
Wow. Where has this affected you, or might this have affected you most in your life, right? This idea that I think people think I'm much smarter than I am based on the fact that I can speak, fairly succinctly. I can make my point. I'm good at getting others to buy into what I'm saying based on my intonation. Those things are practiced, by the way. That wasn't something I came out of the womb knowing, but I always laugh that like our family had that sort of church, Beyonce had her starting in church. I had my starting in church with public speaking. But I do think the fact that I sound like I know what I'm saying makes people think I'm much brighter than maybe I am. And I wonder how that might have impacted you having a more difficult time doing this, because I think you're much smarter than I am. And yet I could imagine that maybe people didn't always see it or understand it based on how you were speaking.
I think speaking was definitely one of them, I think. I just didn't talk a lot because I didn't feel confident in what I was going to say. Like, when we would sit around the dinner table growing up, and for those of you who don't know our family, our mom and our dad met at a debate tournament and they were debating each other. And Dad's pickup line to Mom was, "Hey, nice sweater."
Wow. Wow. That's like a whole different era. All right.
Whole different era, right?
Different era. Yeah.
But we would be having these conversations, but they were debates, like where you would bring your points and you'd have your facts. And I just remember sitting and listening a lot, but not ever really talking because I couldn't formulate in that way. I couldn't form my thoughts in that kind of succinct way because that would require me knowing what I'm about to say, keeping that in my short-term memory, pre-processing it to be able to give you a main point, and then providing you with details of evidence to back it up in order to create the conclusion that I want to create. And I the same thing happened in the 5-paragraph essay in school. Like I thought I was a terrible writer because I could not do a 5-paragraph essay to save my life.
Right.
But if you ask me to stream of conscious, I can go off for days. If there's somebody around who's giving me a prompt like you are, I sound a lot smarter than I actually feel sometimes. So I think it would have, I had another thought in my head and I've already forgotten it.
That's okay. We're just in Rosie's brain, going down the Rosie brain train. It's all good. It's all good. So when you're thinking about yourself, like in your school life and your work life, did this difficulty, I mean, this is one of your challenges, right? Not everything is what we consider a challenge. It might just be a difference. But in this case, I feel like it's a challenge for you.
Yeah.
And how might that have impacted what was happening in school or what was happening at work?
Well, in school, it definitely impacted it because of how much writing and relaying of information you have to do. And so if you are testing for knowledge and for understanding, well, if I can't put it into a succinct morsel, like I could tell you what it was about, but it would not be the way that you want me to tell it. It would take a while for me to get there. So I think that was part of it. I think also in school, let me go back now to to work. let me split between the two because there's something else for school and I can't remember what it was. But with work, I think it really made it hard to deal with people and to be able to address conflict. Because in order to address conflict, you have to be able to state what's going on, create your points, and then help to find a solution for that problem. And that was always so challenging for me. And you're just going to have difficulties, right? You're going to have a hard time with people in general, but I didn't know how to communicate that well. And so it definitely led to a lot of misunderstandings or, really hard situations work-wise.
It's like relationships having to deal with that. What might be some strategies that you found have worked for you over the years? Because I feel like you've done a really good job with me, for example.
Yeah. I think therapy was a huge one. That was the first one. Because because I had felt so stupid for so long because I couldn't formulate these things in my head properly. Oh, that's what I was going to say. The other part about school that was really hard was exam questions. So Brian recently has been telling me about how these kids at the Defense Language Institute, they're having to do all these different exams. He's like, yeah, well, with the exam, it's like really obvious because, when they ask this question, they're asking for it. And there's apparently all these rules that you just follow. And then that's how you do tests well. And I was like, what are you talking about? There's no rules. It's just a right answer, right? And he's like, well, no, sometimes there's 2 right answers, but which one's the more right answer? And I'm like, what do you mean the more right answer? He's like, well, because, the way that you read it. I'm like, yeah, but the way I'm reading it, it could be this other answer, or it could be a different answer because I could read it multiple ways. And he's like, that's the problem, Megan. That's why you probably didn't do well on tests because you're trying to read too much into it. I'm like, ugh. So that was the other thing I was thinking about. What was your question again?
Maybe some strategies that have helped you with relationships with... Oh, yeah. It sounds like part of this is, you're not in school anymore. So I'm sure there's strategies you might have come up with for when you had to give a speech or you had to go through and do, this, that, or the other, but, also relationships as well, right?
Well, yeah, in school, I turned everything into scripts. I turned everything into theater. I would write a pilot for Star Trek, or I would create a monologue that I had to do, so like I used theater as a way to kind of help me make those things. But in relationships, I mean, this is like actually 100% connected with me and Brian. And I had never been with somebody who I had clashed so much with verbally, but also maybe it was the fact that he was willing to tell me that I was clashing with him. And it took years to figure it out. But what it comes down to is that I think in pictures, I speak in pictures, and he speaks in grammar. So when you have a person who's talking in pictures, talking to someone in grammar, they're not going to, like, you could be saying the exact same thing, but it sounds completely different because of just how you're saying it. So I think over the years, like, I've definitely learned to listen better and repeat, because I think it's like 85% of what we say, it's either 75 or 85%, but a large percentage of what we say to each other gets misheard in communication.
Just in general. It doesn't matter if you have ADHD or not, right?
Yeah. Like, we just don't hear what each other is saying, or we don't interpret it the way that people want us to interpret it. So for me, literally parroting back, whatever you say, I say it back to you to say, oh, okay, this is what you just said. So that it, one, tells you, Michelle, that I've heard what you said. And then it also provides you that opportunity to say, yes, that's what I said, or sort of, let me explain a little further. And then I repeat it back so that if I can repeat it back into my words and the other person agrees with it, then I know that I've captured what they're trying to say.
Yeah. And one thing I feel like as you're saying that, it helps me with you is sort of you educating me. So you educate me a lot about your brain and what is happening and what doesn't happen and what to expect and what is hard. And it's hard because otherwise I think you can take it really personally with somebody who's you're in a relationship that, the person has ADHD. I had this happen just the other day with my son, your nephew. And, he was late to something that was really important to me. And I remember just getting so frustrated and taking it so personally. And then kind of coming back and remembering, oh, right, like he was doing the best he could. He made it. He was having a struggle with it. And so I think it's difficult sometimes, if somebody's not speaking clearly or succinctly or able to tell you everything, communicate everything to you in a way that's clear, that has ADHD, it's remembering to be patient, to give that grace, to let them know that, you're listening, and on the other side as well, that, but I love that you've also sort of started that practice of really listening and internalizing. And I think it's important for the person who's partnering, in whatever way that looks like, whether it's parent, child, siblings, friends, whatever
coworker.
It is. Yeah, your husband or wife or, spouse. I think it's just that process of like giving each other space and also really attuning and attending and not reading into what is being said or not said or done or not done as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also challenging for the person with ADHD, coming from my point of view, that for so long it was like I didn't want to acknowledge what I had and what challenges occurred for me, because for so long people had told me I was wrong. And so in not accepting my ADHD, I actually made it more difficult for me to live. And when I started accepting it more and owning it, I think it's fundamentally changed a lot of my relationships and my ability to attend and to not be afraid to text and say, hey, I'm not doing well today, or I'm going to be a little late, or whatever the concern might be. I'm not as afraid to say it anymore, because I know that that's not going to, I know that on the other side of it, the person is going to give me some grace as long as I'm expressing that to them.
And I think the other thing is not apologizing for it either. Because I hear a lot of before, oh, I'm sorry. Like many people with ADHD, this like complete apology for who they are. and for the things they do. And I think that I've seen that change in you of not apologizing, but acknowledging.
Yeah, I've started stating it out loud when I do something that's really awesome, that's totally in my ADHD. And I'm like, I'll ask, I'll ask Brian, like, what did you think about this situation? And he'll tell me his response to it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty awesome, aren't I? Like, I made that happen, didn't I? I think people could say it's fishing for compliments, but it's more of, for me, stating the fact that this is what I bring to your life, right? This awesomeness is why the difficulties are worth working through, because I do bring this very special thing to your life and to my life. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. And the other thing I also do now is I try to make light, not in a sarcastic way, but like if the answer is incorrect,
Yeah.
I just am like, meh, wrong answer. I'm like, the correct answer, Brian, is this. And I tell him the correct answer. And he's like, oh, okay. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, great. Yes, that's the right answer. So I just tell him if it's not the right answer, I'm not going to make him guess it. And
the right answer in terms of how he's saying, what he's saying to you or asking you or communicating to you.
Yeah, I've never asked him this before, but I don't know why it comes into my head. Does this dress make me look fat? Right? And if it's like whatever answer I want to hear, if he's not giving that to me, I'm like, nope, the right answer is get a new dress, Megan. You don't seem to like this one because you're asking me if I look fat, you look fat in it,
Yeah, yeah. That's so interesting. And I think you're unusual in that I think you take answers that some might have difficulty with, but that's good. It's you, you know what you want. I always was thinking, as you're saying this, that it's so important to acknowledge, your issues. And I always say your own limitations, right? And I would always tell my students when I was up at the board, I'm like, there's no, I'm dyslexic, right? So I was like, there's no spell check on the board, folks. So just if you see something, I would very much appreciate you letting me know, but could you do it in a kind way?
Yeah.
I would appreciate, because people thought I was, on the other end, not my speaking ability, but my writing, because I flipped letters so often and wasn't using the correct, grammatical comma or this or that as we were going through school. So I have very vivid memories of feeling less than because of that, and telling people, this is what I go through. This is something I struggle with, but please let me know. But do it nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's another thing that we do too is recently I've been doing is since we moved here, I've had more time since I don't have a full-time job like I had in Arizona. So I've been cooking more. I'll get to Sunday and I'm exhausted. And so then I just tell Brian, I was like, today is not the day that I'm going to be cooking. I need you to help. Like I need to not be doing this. And then it's like, oh, he's like, you're saying it's my job to do the cooking. I'm like, yeah. That's right. It's all you, buddy.
He's so great too, because he's really good at all of that, which is lovely.
Yeah, and the other thing we also do is friendly reminder. Hey, just a friendly reminder,
gentle reminder.
Yeah, and that's what he does for me. It's like, hey, just a friendly reminder that we only have one roll of toilet paper left in each of the bathrooms. I'm like, oh right, I gotta get toilet paper. Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
Oh,
it's
awesome.
amazing what just prefacing in linguistics, it's called naming your frame. Just naming the frame, like a friendly reminder, like, oh, right, you're about to remind me something that I've forgotten. Okay, cool.
It's so helpful, especially when your brain forgets things regularly, right?
Yeah.
It's tough.
Well, and you and I do this with the podcast, right? Like we say, hey, my producer hat on or the editor's hat on. That way it's not like all of a sudden like, oh my God, this doesn't sound good.
Right. Yeah. And we've taken more time kind of getting ready and prepping ourselves for those things as well, which has been so nice for sure. Well, I appreciate your time today talking this through and making sure we know for you what it's like to have difficulty kind of remembering what you're going to say next and putting things in an organized way and how that can impact your life. So my question out to our community is, what might they have done to help deal with this, or if they experience it, and what areas of their life might this have impacted them?
Yeah, because I appreciate just knowing that this has something to do with my ADHD and it's not just because I'm stupid.
Well, I believe from the Google that apparently it is connected to your ADHD, or it's somehow related, right? That these
it would
things
make sense. No, it makes sense now that you say it, that I've never thought about it. But I think that's why the shame is so pervasive in our culture because, you just assume that it's your fault.
Well, and you're told that.
That's true.
Growing up, right? So there's that as well.
There is that as well.
Well, thank you. I love you.
I love you too.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Sisters, Sisters. This series has us focusing more specifically on ADHD and all of its symptoms. If you enjoyed the episode as much as we enjoy laughing with each other, please share it with someone you think would benefit from the conversation. Make sure to follow us on whatever platform you're currently listening to so that you can get notified each week. Next week, we'll be talking about getting focused. Next week, we'll be talking about getting fatigued doing things from your normal schedule. Now, I get fatigued just thinking about being normal, so it will be interesting to see how this plays out next week. But until then, here's to a great end of the week, and remember to stay curious.